The wheel of time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, a Wheel of Time read-along podcast. Each week, we will be reading, discussing, and digesting a small selection from Robert Jordan's fantasy opus. This quest is led by Tylor, a true Wheel of Time warrior.
I have all stories, ages that were and that will be. And I'll be joined by Greg, a complete novice to the Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time and the wheel of a man's life turn alike without pity or mercy.
Join us each week as we read the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time, traveling deeper and deeper through the glass columns.
But what does that even mean?
No. You don't get to find out yet.
Hello and welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly read-along Wheel of Time podcast, closing in on the very end of The Great Hunt, Book 2 of the Wheel of Time saga. I, of course, am Greg, who enjoys practicing, which is relevant for tonight. And joining me is Tylor, who does not enjoy flights from the White Tower.
Both of those things are accurate, although I have never had the latter. You say we are closing in on the end of the Great Hunt. At the end of this episode, we will be just 5 weeks away from finishing.
Oof.
So it feels like we are very much approaching climax time. And I may have misremembered what happened in the second of these chapters, so I may have overhyped this week. But next week, get ready for what I promised last time.
Climaxing, flights from White Towers. It's going to be one of those nights. All right, on to our chapter summaries.
I will just say I did recently just see the most gorgeous fan art I have ever seen. I will look up the artist's name and rep them on the next episode. It was absolutely beautiful, and it is impossible to paint Tar Valon and not have it be phallic. The White Tower is just too large and too vertical. With that, why don't we dive straight in to chapter 38, Practice. So Egwene begins this chapter. She's basically practicing using the power, creating orbs of light. She is only debatably allowed to do that. Technically, novices aren't allowed to use the power at all unless they're being taught by one of the accepted. Nynaeve is in the room, which is her loophole, but Nynaeve isn't allowed to teach still for a variety of reasons that all seem to be at least a little bit Nynaeve's fault in the analysis. We realize that this is a bit of a jump forward in time. It's about 13 weeks since she has arrived in Tar Valon. We will talk about those dates when we get through. And then we basically get Min needling Egwene about Elsie flirting with Galad. We get some more of Galad being really pretty. And then we get an interesting note from Min that Galad is so good, he will make you tear your hair out. And we get that confirmed in just another moment when Elaine, Galad's sister, arrives, and she rushes in the room saying that Galdrian, the king of Carrion, has been killed, and then gives us a list of other interesting things that are going on around the world. And then she basically confirms what Min has been saying about her brother. She's like, yeah, he's the absolute worst. Don't. Egwene, we learn next, has stopped dreaming about Rand a few weeks ago, and she even describes it as him feeling like he's missing from the world, which, as we'll talk about, kind of lines up with him going through the portal stone. We also learn that Nynaeve is very upset because she was punished for hitting another one of the accepted, which seems like a thing that you would get punished for. And Nynaeve and I believe it is Min get into a little bit of an argument when Min lets this slip to the other girls, and they kind of get hot-headed at each other. And then Nynaeve explodes with the power and blows open the doors. They eventually apologize to one another. Egwene asks Min to read them and tell them a little bit about their future, and she says she doesn't notice much, but she does see danger in their future, and it wasn't something she saw before. The way I put the next thing in my notes is suddenly : Leandrin. She just bursts into the room, breaks everything up. She sends Min and Elaine out immediately, and then she starts asking the other two whether they know Rand, and they respond reasonably with, "Do you know anything? What's going on?" And Leandrin is remarkably vague. She says, "Something is wrong. They can help. You've got to come to Tomon Head with me." And they do with remarkably little questions, right? Nynaeve pushes back a little, and Leandrin basically gives her like, it's to help Rand, kind of, probably. And that seems to work. At this point, it turns out that Min and Elaine have been listening from the other room. They are interested in joining. And Min says that now more than ever, the danger is clearer, and actually says that means Elaine must go because it proves that she is in some way involved with this weaving of the web. And that kind of basically leads us to the end of the chapter where everyone is packing and getting ready to depart. And I just want to start our discussion with what I think is the most interesting thing about this chapter. It yada, yada, yadas almost 3 months of the lives of these girls at one of the more interesting points in their lives, I think. What do you think about the amount of time we have spent with kind of the minutia of Rand, and then let's leap forward with this other group of characters?
It's a really interesting choice, and my initial impression was how smart it was, because it felt like the point was to fast forward through their school, right? And
Yeah.
obviously Harry Potter comes to mind, and the Patrick Rothfuss books, I forget.
Wise Man's Fear and Doors of Stone is the one we're all waiting for.
Yeah,
right?
that series, Kingkiller
Yeah.
Chronicles. And in both of those, so much is spent on training, and both of them have a very academic kind of structure to them.
I would also throw in Lev Grossman's The Magicians if you haven't read
okay.
it. Solid trilogy.
I haven't, but I should. And again, it's always funny to reference these things in the wrong order. Like these would come after that. So it's almost, it's not like he's responding to this trend, but I think the school structure is very familiar to YA, just because YA focuses on school age subjects. So I was surprised when it jumped forward, and it felt very smart. And then I found myself really wanting to know more about the outside world than I did about these women. And maybe it's my own bias and problems, but they're like, oh, the king of Carhane I was like, what? Like we were just there and we just learned all that. And it's not that that's an anomaly. That's what this book has been. Both books, it's let's focus on these characters and hear about the rest of the world through rumor and innuendo.
Yeah.
But it was like this tantalizing, like, oh my God, like the Game of Games. Like, how's that going to react to the king being killed? And yet we don't get that. And so I think it totally matched how everything's gone, but it ended up making me feel cheated in a way that I would have probably been cheated anyway.
Yeah, there's a part of me that feels like we get excited by the news of the outside world because that's what Robert Jordan is writing for us to get excited about, right? We basically skip all of the training and the organization, and we learn basically nothing about the White Tower in this chapter, despite it being the first one where we're in the head of someone who knows how this organization works. And so I think this is almost Robert Jordan being like, there is a lot to do in this place and I don't have time to do it. How do I avoid creating all of the plots that get initiated the second you look into the White Tower in any real way? I think he's almost avoiding that and giving us these crumbs to make us be okay with the magic trick of just ignore that giant building that we've been talking about for 2 books.
Well, and I don't think Amazon has been playing the games that HBO has been playing, where they try to fill in the gaps of all their franchises, or AMC might be the worst offender on that, where it's like, oh, you liked our shows 10 years ago? Here's just 10 spinoffs of each.
There is actually going to be a Luce Theron prequel show that I am very excited about, but
it feels like you could be like, oh, and let's do these 4 months as like an in between 2 seasons of the TV show spinoff of let's really get into it, stories from the White Tower or something. But you're right that it certainly doesn't seem like Robert Jordan is interested in telling those stories,
or at least not telling them now, right? I don't want to say that there will never be any good training stories, but I think right here he is saying like, look, I have bigger fish to fry in the world. We can skip that at this moment. And I think it works well, right? We get excited about the little details that we do get, even though they're details from outside of this organization we've kind of been dying for information about for a long time. The fact we didn't come in complaining, we came in saying, look at all these great things from Carrion and elsewhere. I think that's just a really good show of Robert Jordan's craft, right? He got us thinking the right thing. That being said, before we dive into the news of the outside world, I want to place where we are chronologically because there's a little bit of time skipping happening that's slightly confusing here. So I looked this up online. I am not the person who tracks dates. Rand goes through the portal stone on the 4th of July, translated into his world's calendar, right? That is approximately where it is in terms of like the equinox and what have you. We are now, or I'm sorry, Rand arrives on Toman Head on November 14th. So
Wow.
Rand misses a significant period of time. It's mid-November. We are, I think Egwene says 13 weeks from when she arrived at the White Tower. That puts us in late September. So we are about a month and a half before Rand's arrival, but still several months after Rand's departure. So we're kind of splitting the difference here in terms of timing. I don't know whether that colors the way that you're thinking about any of the events of this chapter, but that is just a little bit of detail that I think hopefully like the reading group that is this podcast can give you that you would miss out on otherwise.
Yeah, I would say my head definitely defaulted to we were keeping consistent with Rand so that we were now the full time ahead with Rand. So that is actually really interesting to me that we didn't do that. And it makes me wonder why exactly he constructed it that way, right? Like,
right.
Because you could have ended Rand's chapter on off we go, and we don't get that little bit of an arrival scene, and then you could keep it in a strict chronology. But, the burden of keeping us in a character's perspective and perhaps not wanting to jump all the way to November. I assume there's a plot reason they want the Fellowship of the Ladies to be in Toman's Head seemingly a couple months earlier.
Yeah, and this is, I think, the interesting mystery here, right? If I am giving you additional information that the book doesn't, hopefully what that is balanced by is getting new stuff that you are excited by, right? And it is worth noting these dates can be derived from the book if you track the number of days they travel through the wood. I don't care. I looked it up.
I'm currently reading a book, Star Wars Timelines, that is trying to do exactly that for literally all of the Star Wars canon. So you open a page and it's like, here's what's happening in the animated show and the comic book and the novel and the live action show. It's like it is a certain kind of nerd brain that I don't have. It fascinates me, but I agree with you that like so glad somebody figured it all out so that I can check it, but really not interested enough to do it myself.
Yeah, huge shout out to the Wheel of Time fandom page. They have everything my nerd brain wants in terms of statistics. It's amazing.
Perfect.
We begin this chapter with some, I think, really good classic Robert Jordan remind you who the characters are and where we left them. We get kind of updates on Galad and Egwene, maybe seem like their relationship is progressing a little bit. Galad is ignoring other girls and asking after her, even though she hasn't really shown any attention. We get Elsie Grinwell flirting, which is just a nice, fun reminder of book one when Rand stayed in her farm. We get a lot of good character reminders, but I'm not sure there's too much new here, which I think fits into what we were saying earlier of Robert Jordan kind of wanting us to focus on the not their past 4 months of life. Is there anything you pulled out in this early section before we say, oh my God, Galdrian died?
I guess the only other thing in my notes is I noticed how I thought we were supposed to see how advanced Egwene was.
Yeah.
But in particular, she says she loves channeling and doesn't feel whole almost when she's not channeling, like misses it. It was a little bit of language towards something like addiction, but I don't think it has any kind of sinister connotation. It just stood out to me that it's become quite natural to her, which hints at her powers, although we know the Nynaeve is the quite powerful one.
Yeah, and I think that this, to me, was really interesting in the context of contrasting it with Rand, who just a chapter ago was leaving an Ogier steading, and so kind of responding to feeling Saidin in a way that I don't think he had ever really been consciously aware of before that, right? Having it taken away really made him realize when it was back. And that contrast of Egwene feeling like she can't hold herself back from drawing as much, or she wants to do it, really felt like it it mirrored Rand's dilemma of not wanting to channel at all really effectively, showing that that's not just Rand and not just potentially madness, but also just a part of using the power. It is wonderful, but part of wonderful things is that sometimes you want to use them too often. And I think it's really well drawn, that parallel. But I think you're right. That's really the only interesting new nugget that we get there, other than a lot of pretty effective character reminders. So I guess it's time then. Oh my God, Galdrian's dead.
And it has to be Barthanes, right? Having absolutely no evidence in any direction. But it just felt like, when we left the game, the two of them were the chief rivals, and we know Barthanes had kind of made a deal with the Dark Friends to do some of this work and so on. So it feels like his final power play probably was effective. That's all just wild speculation on, oh my God, the king's dead.
I am going to play my favorite game, which is, I won't tell you whether this is at all accurate, but this is what I thought my first time. I read that sentence, and the first time I read it, I went, oh my God, Tom killed a king. I don't know whether that is correct, but we had a lot of setup in the previous chapter.
That's right. That's right.
Figuring out that it was actually the king who sent the killers after Dina. I think your answer is probably actually more likely given the preponderance of evidence that we have. But that was my 13-year-old, oh, that could have happened. Maybe I Sherlocked it. I was very excited by that concept. We also get a good bit of interesting information about some other things going on. We hear that the false dragon in Saldia has been captured. We learn that there is still a war going on in Tyr. And we start to hear what I think are hints at the Seanchan, but not yet fully fleshed out. Elaine says something like there are even rumors about Arthur Hawkwing being back, which is not accurate. But if you just added the word armies to the middle of that sentence, it probably would be. So that's getting to the point where people are realizing it, even though if it's still kind of being filtered by that game of, telephone that is rumors in a medieval setting. Anything in that kind of world update that really jumped out to you beyond, obviously, the big one, kind of major player we'd just been reading about is dead?
Only that we had just experienced Rand's visions of alternative timelines. And it was interesting to me how this flash forward and these kind of rumors felt exactly the same, right? It's like the experience of reading them is a couple little details that are helpful and interesting. And oh my God, let's keep moving on. And it's almost like I didn't process them as real, thinking of them as just one alternative, which they are. They are just the one that matters in our particular timeline. So in the context of that all too, I thought the mood in these two opening sections just was so clearly everybody is sick of the White Tower life. It doesn't seem like anybody's enjoying it. And they are kind of, you alluded in your summary that they're quick to go along with Leandrin, but it's they would all run off to just go milk cows or something too, because they seem to hate it.
I mean, I get it. I am a man who learned to cook during grad school because I needed literally anything other than PhD to do with my time. So I can appreciate where they are at a grinding, painful institution that makes you a better person eventually, hopefully. That just makes sense to me.
Well, mine was becoming obsessed about getting every single Xbox achievement I could. And I feel like your skill is more applicable and you have better use of your time. Meanwhile, I'm my gamer score is so awesome. Do you know anybody else who 1,000-pointed Shrek 2? I bet you don't.
Let's get back on track slightly.
You always say that when I bring up Shrek, Tyler.
That is usually the trigger, yes. By talking about the fact that Rand has vanished from Egwene's dreams, right? One of the most kind of prominent features of this character, the last 2 or 3 times we've been in her head, has been the fact that she has prescient dreams, and one of the Aes Sedai thinks that she may be a dreamer. And we've gotten a lot of lore around this. And so it feels significant that Rand goes through a portal stone and then it apparently is not on this world or not connected to her dreams in some way. She's almost getting a 504 bad server error when she's about to have a dream about Rand. Did that jump out to you on the page the way that it did to me when I was reading?
I'm gonna say no, but engage the point as if it did. So it didn't stand out to me with that. I'd forgotten the kind of piece of how her dreams have been prescient before. But as you were going through it in the summary, I was definitely like, oh, right. So it seems to be one of these rules. We talked last time about fantasy rules. And so when somebody is on another plane, they are really kind of not like at all accessible or present in this world. Almost like having removed one of them from the timeline entirely, right? That feels a little like the Marvel multiverse rules or something like that we're clipping a timeline or something like that. So that's really interesting, and I assume is exactly why she's not dreaming of him. And we get in the next chapter, she does mention dreaming of the man in the mask. I forget which of these two chapters it is.
I think it was in this one, or you may be right. Yeah.
I don't remember now.
It was in a chapter.
And says, this time he was not wearing the mask, but, the fact that when Rand wanes, Baalzamon waxes, I think is pertinent.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think keeping an eye on what does the world look like and is it any different in the time that Rand has been gone, I think is going to be a really interesting kind of view at, especially if we're thinking about Rand as a really powerful Ta'veren. What does it mean to not have that warp in the weave anymore? Might be an interesting thing to track over the time that he's gone. My notes then get very brief. Liandrin is scary and remarkably vague about everything, but I think we both already had pretty strong suspicions about Liandrin, and so this isn't too much new information from me. Did you glean anything new or of interest about Liandrin from this scene?
I don't think we've seen her since we established that Aes Sedai can't lie.
Yes.
And so I was definitely playing that game and noting her exact wording. And I mean, even to say they are lies of omission is generous, because it's not just an omission. It's I thought a lot about Knives Out, which I love, when Benoit Blanc trains Marta to tell her story without lying. And he says to her, say these lines. And she says 4 truthful sentences about what happened that night. And I felt that this was the exact game going on here. It was the boys are in danger. Moraine has been sending letters about them to the White Tower, or about you to the White Towers, I think, about the women. I want to take you to Toman's Head, and you love Rand. It was manipulative, but just based in just describing their relationship, not actually piecing that. So all of that, I saw the familiar characters, Nynaeve and Egwene, filling in the details just entirely wrong, but in the way they were led to. And it was really a nice little bit of trickery in writing.
It feels like, have you ever watched those ads for like a late night psychic as someone who doesn't believe in psychics? There is nothing more fun than watching someone give vague leading questions and knowing what the person is going to say, and then they exactly say it. And that, I think, is what Liandrin is doing here, right? She knows exactly what these characters' motivations are and what they want and what she wants out of them. And bing, bang, boom, it is very easy for her to arrange a situation where she doesn't lie and they are on her side, at least temporarily. It's a masterclass. And I think that tells us something. I think we are now at the point of having had a good bit of kind of encounter time with 3 Aes Sedai. I'm thinking Varen and Moraine and Liandrin. And there are a lot of traits that I think we initially ascribed to Moraine in terms of being very thoughtful and deliberate and having a plan, that I'm now willing to start considering maybe those are just Aes Sedai traits, because Liandrin is doing something straight out of the Moraine playbook here, I feel like.
And to that point, I would just say that the 3 of them are so similar. I mean, I'm just repeating your point back to you, but when we were told by Tom and other characters, don't trust the Aes Sedai, you're like, oh, I totally get that now, because the one we think is super sinister, the one we think is actually like the only hope, and one we think is generally good, are all essentially acting the exact same way. So you understand how people in this universe would lump them all together and not trust any of them.
And then I think the end of this chapter is just like the dominoes falling over, right? It's just, okay, once Liandrin leaves the room, it's the other two girls heard everything. Of course, they're going to come along. And then we get this interesting note about kind of like destiny and what does it mean that when Elaine came along, the prophecy became like more real or more concrete. But that little bit of world building, I think, is the key bit I want to pull out of this. Everything else feels like kind of like piece shuffling, like we've talked about in previous chapters.
Yeah, I mean, you hit upon the only note I had is just that Min puts Elaine into the mix in a kind of felt like a promotion of Elaine. Not that she seemed unimportant, but that she's being pulled in now.
Yeah.
And you had said that the show rewrites some of this to make Egwene more of one of the prophecy, right? Or
yes, she is potentially one of the people who could potentially be the Dragon Reborn. Basically, the difference is in the book, the Dragon Reborn is definitively male. In the show, it could be either male or female, and so she fits the bill.
Well, and she feels more Taverin-y
Yeah.
right now, and I'm not ready to jump to that, but it is like if we're putting her as one of the four, it certainly fits that she belongs in that set and feels like she pulls the forces around her in that way.
I am willing to say at this point, I think we're far enough in for me to just say this. Neither Nynaeve nor Egwene is ever like definitively declared a Taviran, and it is a widely held fan theory or headcanon that either one or both of them is, and it's just not acknowledged or not noticed because they have the power, and so it's assumed that that is what's doing whatever it is. So I am a big believer in Egwene as Taviran too, but
Nice.
Just to know that that's a headcanon for many of us longtime readers, but not something you're ever going to get confirmation of.
Well, instead, how about you give me confirmation of the contents of chapter 13? 39. I don't know why I messed up the number.
I actually have one more quick note that I wanted to do related to Min, and then I will definitely hop over. I just want to highlight the phrasing that she has when she says that Elaine is related. When she says that she's going, she says, Elaine, you are tied to ... the boys. I can guarantee she was about to say the word Rand.
Yeah.
So just, I think that seemingly prophesied link between those two characters, I think isn't something that we've had before. So definitely worth noting. On to chapter 39 or 13, if you prefer Greg's numbering system, Flight from the White Tower. So the girls begin the chapter in kind of fancy outfits so that they can blend in with all of the women who are at the White Tower to ask for help from either the Merlin or other Aes Sedai. And everyone is dressed up very fancy except for Min, because just like we saw with Matt, someone has to be the servant. We basically find out that they were told nothing by Liandrin and given no orders, so they are trying to maneuver everything themselves. They arrive at the stables and try to get 2 horses and are told there are already 2 horses waiting, so they have to get 2 more. Basically, everyone's done something twice, and I think we're supposed to find it interesting that the girls didn't pick up on this plan, or maybe that they are over planning, but it actually ends up working out pretty perfectly. They arrive at an Ogier steading with exactly the right number of horses and find out that they are going through the ways. Liandrin is very unhappy, and she seems to basically say, why did you bring 2 more people? And again, phrasing I think is important here. She says something along the lines of, I had ways to deal with 2 of you. And the other 2 seem to frustrate her. They then go into the ways, and we get several pages of descriptions of how dark and gloomy the ways are, and also one conversation where Liandrin says, we'll be in here as long as I say we are. And then they leave the ways, and they're home. Not a lot happens in this chapter, at least in my notes. This feels to me like we need to get to a place, and travel needs to feel meaningful, and let's kind of use it as an opportunity to see inside Egwene's head a little bit where she's at. I don't know that there's a ton here from my perspective. Are you seeing more than I am as a first-time reader?
My notes are maybe more moments within the mix. So I'm certainly not negating what you just said. I think I'm largely agreeing, but there were just a couple little pieces that I picked on as we went through. Um, None of that has to do with the first part of the chapter. It's like we're wearing fancy clothes, good for us. Let's sneak into the stables, let's annoy the stable hands, and then get out of the building. It seemed to be relatively smooth, and like, yeah, clearly the plan was for 2, and then they could just kind of lie their way through to get 4 horses.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that works out here that makes me very happy is that they end up with Bella as opposed to Leandrin's plan, which would not have had them with Bella. And Bella's amazing. So, yay. Second half of the chapter.
But not Cupcake. Cupcake did not make it out of the stables. We're leaving Cupcake, the fake horse, at I have been listening to a podcast for about 10 years, and one host recently got caught on an inside joke like Cupcake, and the guest was like, "What are you talking about?" And slowly he went through 10 years of that joke. And so that's now my aspiration, is that, by book 12, we'll be talking about Cupcake and Cupcake's offspring and the vengeance that Cupcake's offspring seek in the Aiel Waste. And people will be like, "What are they?" Yeah. So couple of things I made note of. So there's no black wind at the Waygate. So the impression I had is that the black wind was not pervasive, but was specifically hunting Rand. Not confirmed, but not
it's supportive evidence.
Yeah. And the fact that the ways are darker than they were previously, but specifically that's not the black wind. Anything we should know about them being darker, or is that just the world is getting darker?
Yeah, I think that is the thing that I wanted to highlight. Is earlier we were saying kind of what has changed in the time of this book, and also what has changed since Rand has left the world, right? We think that is probably messing with things. And so this is where I get stuck a little bit with the ways being darker. I think this is significant. I think it is creepy. I think the sheer number of pages Robert Jordan spends emphasizing it tells us we should be noticing it. But I don't really have a good sense of what is the cause or what's going on there. We know the ways are in some way tied to the male side of the One Power and the madness within it. So maybe this says something about madness kind of touching the world. We've heard Moraine use language about how much the Dark One can touch the world. So maybe if that is increasing, the ways would become darker. But I think at this point, I've got just pure speculation as far as what options are, but no real strong evidence pointing in any direction or the other as far as what it could be or what causes look like.
All right. So not that we're in a rush for any reason, but I've got speed round. Here are my 5 observations, and I'm going to give them to you from my notebooks because that was helpful, and maybe you'll have helpful things about all of them. A quote, when they're not sure they trust Leandrin, they say, "Well, if Moraine can work with her," which to me is what I referenced last chapter of they filled in the blanks entirely wrong and are now building an understanding off of that. So that felt consequential, if not significant.
Yeah, no, I think that is definitely a good sign of kind of what these characters are thinking and how little misunderstandings get multiplied. I think this is something Robert Jordan does an excellent job of, is characters read something wrong on page 5 and it causes them to make a bad decision on page 570. And I think if you follow those links, he's actually telling really interesting, intricate stories. The chapters that often I think get branded as boring are chapters that set up for things like this. But I think you hit the nail on the head. I want to highlight this is a really good catch, but I don't have anything much to say beyond the girls have horribly misread this situation. It reminds me of that trope and dramas on TV or in movies where you overhear half of the conversation and it makes the thing sound the opposite of what it is. I feel like these girls have had that experience with Leandrin and Moraine. They've seen them quietly chatting in corners and hallways, and they're like, "Oh, look at them making plans together," and the two are just insulting each other mercilessly. They have not read the situation well.
Yeah, I was just reading a book that did that trope so badly. It was literally a staticky radio message, and it was like, "Do not go to," and they're like, "Go to." Okay, I'm like,
I,
really? Like that's the best we have at this point?
on the other hand, I have to say both my favorite book and one of my like 5 favorite movies based on that book is basically a giant trope of exactly that. It's a misunderstood conversation for 350 pages.
Oh,
Read Atonement. It's wonderful, but
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's the book.
I've seen the movie. I haven't read the book.
It's even better.
All right. Next one is just, I don't even think we have to talk about this, but I do have in my notes that this is where Egwene talks about dreaming of Beelzemon. So
yeah,
rewind to everything we said about that there. My next line.
I would just throw in, I think you had the exact right read on this for people like Lindsay and Ben who might have hit the skip 15-second button. The rise of Beelzemon at the same time of the vanishing of Rand, I think is a really good point that you had pulled out earlier. So let's move on to 3.
Oh my God, he's complimented me twice in the last 5 minutes. And that's 2 more times than the entire 10 years of our friendship before this. That I don't even think we've been friends 10 years. So we'll move on. I'm going to give you this.
We're closing in on 8.
Exactly as it is in my notes because I want to lose some of these this respect you've been showing me. Elaine horny for Rand is what I wrote down, which is just it's like out of nowhere, but it reminds me kind of the adolescent thing where like you have the dream guy or girl at camp and it's like they were perfect and I have such a crush on that person I will never see again and can be frozen in the 1 week I knew them and didn't have any problems with them.
Bro, you're not allowed to criticize that trope as the only person I know who married someone he met when you were what, like 8 or something?
17, but yeah, it's been a while. Totally fair criticism. I'm not even sure that was criticism, but also like it is so funny that they had like an hour together, but in her dream, it's like I could build up a life and that could make sense. But it does resonate very clearly with the line from Min you pointed out at the end that there seems to be a bit of destiny or betrothal about this interaction.
Yeah, and I think that I have always read these interactions as being a flaw in Robert Jordan's writing. I think he likes to introduce characters and make it clear that they kind of like each other. And then he does this weird thing. We've seen it a little bit with Nynaeve and Lan, where either the relationship happens off screen or there is an abrupt leap forward, right? And so, I don't know, he's doing the thing he does where he has people fall in love with the idea of each other, which don't get me wrong, when you're writing 18-year-old characters, spot on, accurate, good work, Robert Jordan. But it's also, I know a lot of people who love these books in part because of the romance. And I think that is a big part of what Robert Jordan is doing. And I'm always like, I love the idea of the romances, but I don't think Robert Jordan is a good romance writer. He has his characters chat for 5 minutes and then they're definitely going to get married, y'all.
I heard some feedback from one of the coworkers of my wife who was listening to us, and I believe still is, but I'm not positive. Catherine pointed out how boneheaded I was, me, Greg, at not seeing the romance in the first one. Yeah. And I know she is a big romance reader, and I think exactly like you said, that's a big part of her fandom of this. And she just like rubbed her hands with glee at I was not getting it, which is the beauty of the structure we have on this podcast. So I was glad to provide entertainment to her and anyone else who felt that way if you're listening along. Number 4.
I will admit to being completely oblivious about Nynaeve and Lan multiple times reading through this series, right? Sometimes, even like the second or third time I read these books, I got to the reveal and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot I was supposed to be looking for clues that was happening.
So number 4 is just that Liandrin has a map of some kind that she specifically hides, right? She has parchment or something that she will not let the others see, which felt significant.
Yeah, I don't have any more ways to say Liandrin is so sus, right? I am just kicking her off the ship. I am willing to stake my reputation on it. She the imposter. Like,
sure.
That is accurate. I have no more ways to respond other than that.
And then the last one is just a little bit of writing I liked, which is what Leandrin says when they arrive, which is, I have brought you at last to where you must go. And I just liked that kind of Yoda-ish kind of circuitous sentence syntax.
Yeah.
But I also found it very interesting that it's at last. It's like, I met you 5 minutes ago.
Right.
I mean, it's more than that in universe, but it's like, this has been a 1-chapter friendship, and it's like, at last. So that made me think much more about the grander schemes and the grander plans. This is in the works for a long time. Yeah. And to quote Doctor Strange, we're in the end game now.
Excellent Doctor Strange quote there. Not what I was expecting, but nailed it. I think that this feels like a moment where the parallels between Leandrin and Moraine are stronger than anywhere else in the chapter, right? This feels like the wheel weaves as the wheel wills, kind of like Moraine-ism to me. And so to hear it from Leandrin, I think you're exactly right. It makes me think, what is she kind of latching on to, or what is she kind of thinking about when she thinks about this long-term plan? Because with Moraine, we now know that it is this long-term bring Rand, the Dragon Reborn, to do whatever he was born to do. Leandrin, I'm now wondering, what is the big plan? And as you're saying, who is the one giving her that big plan? These, I think, are the questions we end up with at the end of the chapter that I can't do much to answer, but I love me a good mystery. That's what I like about these books, is Robert Jordan is so good at doing the subtle cliffhanger instead of the dun 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 cliffhanger. And I think this is a fairly well executed one. I'm glad this chapter is over because it means the good stuff is here.
Well, and as I want to bridge from that cliffhanger just into the kind of making concrete what you just implied. One of the big questions to me here still is, did the Dark Friends plan that we had from the prologue on through, did that account for the Shan-Chan, or is this a game changer? It certainly seems like what we've learned is they are not at the moment working in concert with each other, but did they anticipate it, I think, is a separate question, right? Those could be two different relationships there. So, I want to know what this good stuff is, and I want to get to it. And we were just talking before, it's really straight on. Just this has been much steadier than book 1, where it's like just 2 chapters every time. So next week will be chapter 40, Demane, and chapter 41, disagreements. And
you saw me laugh at that joke before the show and decided it would make it to air, didn't you?
Yeah, but I just workshop. We could punch it up a little. I went a little too French on that accent. So we are looking forward to reading more. And as we alluded to at the beginning, again, I'm in the mass market paperback, and it's these 2 chapters take us under 100 pages, which is just so exciting because I think they're going to be. I would not put this down if I didn't have to. So we look forward to those chapters. And Tyler, tell them whatever you want as you close out the show.
So the next 2 chapters begin with the thing that I was hyping up last episode as the end, kind of like the beginning of going down that roller coaster hill. And the thing that I get most excited about, I know it may not be what the rest of you are, but next week, get ready for some ill-advised discussion of visual media as we go visually through the glass columns.
So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, or Amazon. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, you can email us at throughtheglasscolumns@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Twitter by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe to the show, leave us a review wherever you're listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time through the Glass Columns.